Well, happy holidays, everyone. Thanks for showing up. Glad to be back with the Sunday morning group. Want to thank Shelley Graff and Wynn Fricke for covering for me. I'm still in Massachusetts teaching at the Forest Refuge for a few more days. I'll return on the 1st. But as many of you know, there's the year-end retreat happening in the building. So we're just a Zoom community today. And things return to normal after the year-end retreat ends on Tuesday. It's a really wonderful group. We have people practicing at Common Grounds Retreat Center in western Wisconsin, and there's maybe 33 or 34 people practicing at the city center these last 4 days. And then we have about 40 people online practicing. So the year-end retreat is really a three Sangha, three communities coming together to practice. It's our new world, hybrid world. In any case, it's really good to be with you all. Let's go ahead and settle into our meditation time. Taking the time, making a simple temple of our body that is expressing our value of relaxation, release, letting go of what's extra. And the body, the way we're sitting, also expresses our interest in being right in the middle, being awake, being willing to feel whatever's moving in the body and mind. So we're balancing, really relying on these two values, the value of relaxation and the value of alertness and interest, uprightness. So see what that feels and looks like for you and your body today. Eyes can be open or closed. See what feels good for you. And generally, we aspire to have the body relatively still. There may be subtle movements in the body, but we're practicing accepting what it is that arises and not always trying to fix any discomforts that might show up by moving the body. Instead, we just let things be as they are, let things come and go as sensation, and really appreciate the relative stillness, the wakefulness, the relaxation of the body. And in our practice, although it might sound a little strange to say it this way, in our practice from these instructions we've received from the Buddha 2,600 years ago, the present moment, the reality of here and now, it really is in a sense, our object of devotion. We deeply care about connecting, about opening, receiving the way it is. And we undertake the training to keep it all very straightforward and simple, not relating to our idea or our expectations of what's happening. But instead, we're opening to our subjective experience of the body and mind right here and now, as it actually is. Willing to feel what's here to feel. Notice how things come and go, keep changing. And in particular, not afraid of whatever feeling, the underlying feeling tone of our experience is. Whether it's a mental experience of some memory or thought, or physical experience of sensation or hearing a sound, seeing a sight. whatever the feeling tone, the pleasantness or unpleasantness, even the neutrality that might arise with experience, we just let the feeling tone be what it is. Oh, it's unpleasant like this now, or it's pleasant like this now. It's really a act of courage to feel what we feel, but in this balanced, steady, non-reactive way. And of course, we're going to feel whatever impulses, for example, to move the body if we feel pain, or to flinch if we have a disturbing thought or memory. But we're practicing not being surprised by whatever comes and goes, whatever feelings show up and last for a moment and then pass. We're cultivating this capacity to feel whatever moves through us, in a sense. We're letting the body find its natural ease, and the mind, allowing it to find its natural ease, its radiant balance, its radiant equanimity. And then we stay alert to whatever it is that seems to disturb or interrupt the natural ease of the body and the mind. Well, that's interesting. It's almost like a little mindfulness bell goes off whenever there seems to be a disturbance to whatever ease is present. Oh, what's this? In a way, we learn to recognize it as a teacher. This disturbance is a teacher. It seems like I should scratch that itch or think that thought. But can I get interested in that impulse, that tug that is arising out of the feeling that I'm feeling? Maybe I can just, in a generous way, be open to all that comes and goes, recognizing it as just something being known, not feeling like I have to act it out. Maybe it's okay just to feel it. Maybe we don't have to believe any thought that says, I can't practice with this. This first needs to go away. Maybe we don't need to believe that thought. Maybe it's okay just to feel what we're feeling, to feel all the different impulses and tugs, and however big or subtle they might be. Just giving permission for everything to move, for all these hindrances or disturbances to just reveal themselves in the open space, the generous and kind and open space of our mind, of our heart. So let's continue in silence now for a while. Take a little time and stretch if you need to. Another big welcome to everyone. Thanks for coming today. So our Sunday morning program, just virtually today, and I thought it would be nice to reflect for a while on the Buddhist teachings on the 5 hindrances, but just more generally addressing the question, what's the problem? And interestingly, there is a basic ease that we can tune into, like the body can relax. And whatever the mind gets entangled with, worries or planning or comparing, that can be released. So this question, like, what is the problem? Being a human being, having a mind and body, what's the problem? And one way to address this is the problem is that the mind, the sensitive heart, that something arises as the mind goes along and experiences this and experiences that. Something arises in conjunction with that experience of sensitivity. And in Buddhism we call that craving. Right? We are sensitive. And what are we sensitive to? Well, we're sensitive to sights, we're sensitive to sounds, we're sensitive to physical sensations, smells and tastes, and we're sensitive to mental activity, thoughts, memories, mental images, right? So all of that mental activity, and then the 5 physical senses. And that sort of is the bottom line, right? There is sensitivity to these 6 sense gates, to the body and mind. And in that experience of sensitivity to the 6 sense gates, there are lots of moments where craving, where wanting things to be this way or wanting things to be that way, animated by the forces of greed and aversion mostly, and all the different expressions of greed and all the different expressions of aversion, from outright hatred to subtle irritation, right? And this is a teaching from the Buddha that if this heart, if this mind were free of craving, we were still sensitive to whatever we're sensitive to, but craving were not to arise, we would have the experience of the heart free of grasping, the heart free of craving. And this is one of the basic definitions of nirvana or nibbana or freedom. It is the heart or mind that is empty of craving. And we think we might know that, but our lives are so much animated by the subtle and not so subtle cravings, our liking and not liking, that we don't really know the experience of our mind free of craving. And to do that, we need to get to know craving and the experience of it ceasing. The mind is entangled in one way, and we can observe that without feeding it, adding fuel to the fires of craving. And then nothing lasts forever. I mean, think about how many obsessive craving storms, aversive storms we've been involved with just in the last couple of days. A lot, probably. But all of those storms have ceased in order to make room for the next storm. But they do end. But the thing is, we're not awareness, that balanced, bright, fearless presence isn't really there when it goes away, when desire ceases or craving ceases. And that's a moment we really want to be awake for. How craving ceases without having to gratify or get rid of what we want to get rid of. It ends on its own. One way we practice, and maybe you even did it during this last guided meditation, but it's a really surprisingly effective teacher. So we're sitting and we have this intention to be relatively still in our meditation posture. You know, there's some subtle movements, of course. But that intention to be relatively still is actually, it sets up this teaching because, of course, there will be impulses to move. And like one example would be, there's an itch on our face, let's say, or even a little bug has touched the skin, and now we definitely want to touch, make sure the bug's gone, scratch that itch. And the nice thing about something simple like this is we can be pretty clear that it's not going to kill us. But the desire, the craving to scratch the skin or to feel the skin can be quite immense, quite intense, right? So we can learn, it takes practice, but we can learn to feel that impulse to scratch or touch, and just in that balanced way, just keep being aware. It feels like this. The experience is like this. It's this experience being known. You gotta scratch. You know, whatever it is, however big that craving to touch the skin, to scratch the skin is, it can be observed as just that intense mind-body experience being known in this moment. And if we can do that, be aware of it, without getting entangled or identified with it. Because when we start taking that reaction, I gotta scratch my skin. When we start taking it personally, we're actually we're building the momentum of that pattern. But if we can feel it, so we're not repressing it, we're not distancing ourselves in any way, we're just observing it as a phenomena being known. You'll see that that craving to scratch the skin goes away on its own. Maybe it's in a minute, maybe it's in 10 minutes, maybe it's in 2 seconds. It's really a useful thing to build confidence that craving ceases without having to gratify the craving. You know that phrase, the bark is bigger than the bite. You know, there's something about that in terms of craving. It seems like I have to deal with this craving. I'll get down to work, but I got to go get a snack, you know, or I've got to do this, or I got to do that. One of the things that long-time meditators do, like when they're on a retreat, is, you know, if the normal sit is 45 minutes or 60 minutes, they'll sit longer. Because, you know, eventually, even the most limber people, eventually it gets really, really uncomfortable to continue sitting still. And again, it's not about some macho trip to see who can sit the longest. It's about learning something about the mind. So we feel the impulse to move, right? It can be very compelling, like, hey, you sat for an hour and 15 minutes, well beyond your expectations. Everybody already thinks you're a good meditator. You can move now, right? So we see that whole expression of the mind and the feeling tone that goes with it, like the pleasant feeling tone when we imagine moving, and the unpleasant feeling tone that's there because we're not moving, right? Like the leg is hurting or the back hurts or whatever it is. And it's like the wave can build, and it can be so powerful, so compelling. You've got to move the body. And we just, wisdom and awareness, just keep seeing it as a phenomena being known, this reaction or this desire to move. But feeling what it feels like without getting confused by the feeling. And then it will ebb, it will flow away, it will dissipate, and you might be able to sit a lot longer, and now it's not a problem. And then maybe in a couple minutes or in 10 minutes, there's this another very compelling wave of emotion and thought and sensation that all is sort of saying, like, if you don't move, you're going to lose your leg, or the whole world will end, this is not okay, what are you, crazy? And it's, again, it's not about injuring the body, and there's a way to tell if you're actually doing damage to your limbs or whatever. So it's not about that at all. It's just about noticing craving for what it is. It's a mental construction that arises because of certain causes and conditions. It feels as real as anything in life feels. But it isn't what it appears to be. It isn't the truth, like that you have to move, or that I need this new iPhone, or that, it's not okay what's going on in the world, or something like this. That these constructions of our mind, like a craving storm, an aversion storm, they're just what they are. They're something being known. And this is really liberating. The Buddha once said, the mind awareness is luminous and radiant, but is obscured by visiting defilements, and it is freed by letting go of these visiting defilements. That's kind of a paraphrase of the sutta of the discourse. And when the Buddha says the mind is luminous and radiant, he's really talking about the capacity for wisdom when the mind isn't being distorted by our habits around craving, like taking craving personally. Then the mind is really empty of that distortion that craving creates. Right? That emotional impulse, I gotta move, or I've gotta scratch, or I've gotta I have to get rid of. It just seems so personally real. And this is something that it doesn't make sense. Like if I say to you now, oh, it's not personally real, most of you are just going to roll your eyes. No, Mark, it's personally real, But we have to be honest, we've never really checked it out. We've never cultivated a balanced, curious, stable, present moment awareness and observed the arising of a strong craving and sustained awareness with it, just without feeding the craving, without trying to get rid of the craving, just observe the craving and then watch what happens. We haven't gotten to know it. And that's really our job. And see, like the Buddha says, that these storms of craving, wanting, these storms of not wanting, aversion, they're just visiting defilements that are coming and going because of causes and conditions. Another place in the suttas, the Buddha said, when the mind is hindered or obscured or caught up in these distracting patterns, it is neither pliable, nor workable, nor bright, and not rightly composed for the destruction of the causes for suffering. The taints, or the asavas is the Pali word. Sometimes it's translated as the floods. What floods forces our mind down these patterns, like into these entangling, aversion storms or greed storms, where we get obsessive and lost and really in that vortex, as if it were the only truth. You know how it is, like when we're in an addictive pattern, it really feels like if I don't satisfy or gratify this desire, something terrible is going to happen. I can't really get on with my life until I take care of it. And one of the things when we do start to get interested in the problem, like what it is that disturbs the natural ease of our body and mind. And the thing is, we have to be willing to go back. Like, we can't presume we know anything. We really have to go back to the beginning. Like, not look at or a disturbance that we're experiencing as if I know anything about it. So what actually is this in its essence, this disturbance? Whatever it is that disturbs us. I'm getting old and I don't like it. Or I have the possibility, I bought a lottery ticket and I really want to win. And I feel disturbed by that, really wanting to win. Or maybe some of you are football fans and really don't like the Green Bay Packers, who the Vikings are playing today, the Minnesota Vikings, and you just have a strong opinion. And the actual experience is tension. Like, I really want it to turn out this way. Or I really want my daughter to grow up to be this kind of person and not this other kind of person. We have so many ways to be disturbed. And imagine if we just started doing a very kind but careful inventory, and at the end of the day, we were really clear of all the little and big ways our heart, body, and mind got disturbed, got burdened or weighed down or entangled, that hurt, in a way that actually hurt. There'd be a lot. Even toasting our toast too long so it gets a little too toasted, that would be a little burden, wouldn't it? Like, I hate it when my toast is too crisp, and then I've got to scrape off that burnt stuff, and one thing after another. So we have every incentive to get interested. And we discovered that these patterns of craving, and remember, craving really represents both the aversion half of craving and the greed half of craving. Right? Craving is not wanting things to be the way they are because I want to get rid of something, that's the aversion, or because I want something, that's the greed. Right? And these are the two animating forces. Gil Fronsdal, some of you know, a wonderful teacher on the West Coast, calls them the caffeine of the soul, greed and aversion. Really, when we're hanging out with our friends, mostly we're talking about greed and aversion. Can you believe what that person said? Hey, did you see that car? It really does fill up so much of our lives. And there's a real intelligence to these patterns. They're a vortex, or they tend to renew themselves, not in the same way, but we start to feel strangely dead when we don't have some greed or aversion operating in the mind. We don't feel normal when we don't have greed and aversion operating. We like the idea of peacefulness, but a mind that is somewhat, even just, to some degree, free of craving, we may not actually like it when we experience it. Like, it's too peaceful. It's too calm. I realize I'm addicted to the intensity of greed and aversion. And the reason we're addicted is because that's what we know. That's what's familiar. And then over time, that's what we associate with being me, being caught up in greed and aversion. And it really, it revolves around Vedana. Some of you might recognize that Pali word. Gets translated sometimes just as feeling, but feeling tone, just because our word, English word feeling, has so many different meanings. It's used in a very general way about, like, feeling is the same thing as sensing, right? But when we say Vedana or feeling tone, or sometimes use the word feeling, we really mean something more specific. The affective flavor of any experience, whether it's seeing or hearing or sensations or a thought or an emotion, there's an affective feeling. It's either very pleasant or somewhat pleasant, or very unpleasant or somewhat unpleasant, or it's in this middle ground where we can't tell if it's pleasant or unpleasant. And we can call that neutral. And that affective feeling, that Vedana, is really the place to bring our attention. Like if we want to get to know craving, whenever there's some disturbance of craving, the mind wants things to be different than they are. Yeah, I'm doing pretty well, but I'd be a lot happier if I didn't have to wear a mask in public. Or I'd be a lot happier if it's been really about 30 degrees and drizzly most of December here in Massachusetts where I've been teaching. And, I don't mind the mist. It can be kind of nice for a couple of days, but you start to miss the sun after a while and just the cheeriness of sunshine, right? So it's like we might be doing relatively well, but it's just interesting that there's always something that the heart, some little tweak our heart is sort of chewing on to make things better. Like if only I got rid of this, if only I lost a few pounds, if only I got into shape, if only I could discipline myself to do my Pilates every day, then. But that craving, that idea that we identify with, then means we're suffering now because I'm not the person who does my Pilates every day. Right? So there's a squeeze right now because I'm identified with the idea that, if I did exercise more, if I did eat better, then I'd be happy. Or if I sat more, did my meditation more, if I got good at meditation, if I really started to behave myself when I was meditating instead of my mind regurgitating all my problems. It's endless. And the disturbance is here. And what the real kind of catalyst, proximate cause for the disturbance is misunderstanding Vedana. There's no way as a living human being, there's no way that our moments of experiencing aren't going to be colored by Vedana. There is going to be pleasant feeling tone, unpleasant feeling tone, neutral feeling tones. That just kind of comes with the territory of having a mind, right? Because the affective flavor arises because of the past conditioning. So when I see a friend in the distance walking toward me, that visual image, right, comes with a Vedana, comes with an affective flavor. Oh, I'm happy to see that person because they're my friend. It's just a visual experience, but it's pleasant, right? Or if I'm walking along and there's dog poop on the sidewalk, there's an unpleasant Vedana, right? Like, ugh, unpleasant. Why do people not pick up after their dogs or, whatever I think? So it just comes with being sensitive is all constant. Every single sense experience, every contact through the senses will have with it Vedana. A lot of it is neutral. Like I'm feeling the shirt on my back, but it's a neutral Vedana, so I ignore the feeling tone of the shirt on my back most of the time. So maybe the great majority of our sense contacts are neutral. And even that, according to the Buddha, and according to our own practice, when we have enough stability of a present moment awareness, we'll notice it's actually, we think it's hard to be aware of everything, including the neutral experiences, but it's actually stressful to be ignoring. The mind has the capacity to be sensitive to so much. We don't have to shut off so much of the world because it's neutral. But that's what we do, and it's stressful in a subtle way. We start feeling more and more apart or distant or disconnected because we've been trained in a stressful way to ignore what's neutral, to want what's pleasant, and to hate and want to get rid of what's unpleasant. And we're oppressed by that. This is like the ongoing oppression of being an ignorant, which in our sense, is just being ordinary, being an ignorant human being. Being an ordinary human being means that there's Vedana, and the Vedana is being misunderstood. So it's triggering the aversion, it's triggering the greed, and it's triggering the denial or the ignorance, the ignoring of neutral. And so it's no wonder that, we need drugs and we need medications and we need all kinds of things, because it's unpleasant being human. Because we're caught in these, animated by these vortexes of greed, hatred, and delusion. This is what the ordinary state of being human is about. And sometimes it's more intensely unworkable, and sometimes just subtly unworkable. But we want to start noticing it. The Buddhist teachings really begin with this invitation to get to know dukkha. Dukkha is our teacher. Dukkha means the unsatisfactoriness. And there's the kind of ordinary, gross level of what's unsatisfactory. But even pleasant experience in a subtle way is unsatisfactory, because on some level the heart, the mind knows I can't count on it. I might have a lot of privilege, I might be having a really nice moment, but I know it's not mine forever, that things will keep changing. So one way to get familiar, so we can become a better student of the problem, like what gets in the way of ease, is just to get very familiar with the 5 hindrances. The Buddha has different lists of what cause problems. I mentioned the asawas, the defilements, the 3 unwholesome roots. But today I'm just going to talk about the 5 hindrances. And they're overlapping lists about these patterns of, I guess, how craving expresses itself in our human experience, you could say. So the 5 hindrances, just so you can memorize them, which I highly recommend, because they work in pairs, so it's easy to remember. There's wanting and not wanting. That's a pair. Like we want something pleasant, we don't want something that's unpleasant. And there's too little energy, sloth and torpor, right? Sloth is really defined specifically as not really having the energy to do anything. And torpor is a heaviness of the mind and body, or sleepiness. Sloth and torpor, and its opposite is restlessness. And they usually include with restlessness worry and remorse as a very common way. We're restless, we feel bad about something, that remorse, or we're worrying about something. So we have too little energy, too much energy, right? And getting identified with that, right? So all 5 of these hindrances require that mind taking this pattern personally, taking the wanting, the I want to get rid of. I don't like the sleepiness, or maybe I like the sleepiness, but I'm taking it personally. I'm taking the restlessness personally. And the last one is doubt, taking doubt personally. I've got to figure this out. I need to know, is it this way or is it that way? And the Buddha describes these like the affective feeling of getting caught in wanting is like being in debt, right? Like if I really want something to happen, it's like being in debt. And when that wanting is abandoned, it's like being out of debt. And then he likens aversion, not wanting, to being sick, having a bad illness, right? When we're just, something's rubbing us the wrong way and it really shouldn't be this way, and what can I do to make it go away? And that obsession is like being sick. And when the mind is able to abandon or drop the aversion, it's recovering from an illness. It feels good, like recovering from an illness. And too little energy, being sleepy, sloth, and torpor, is like being imprisoned. And if you've been recently really dead to the world, dull, and I'm not just talking about needing to go to sleep at the end of the day, sometimes the mind, uses that sloth and torpor as a way of disconnecting. When the going gets tough, the mind gets dull, right? Because it doesn't want to deal with the toughness. So it just kind of, it closes down. And so that the Buddha likens to being in prison, being caught in it. It's like a glue sometimes, that sleepiness. And then when energy returns, it's like being out of prison, released from prison. And restlessness he likens to being enslaved. And when we abandon the restlessness, released from slavery. And then interesting, doubt, when we're caught in doubt, it has the affective flavor of being in danger. I need to know, what's this? Is it this way or is it that way? We feel in danger if I can't figure this out. And when it gets resolved or when we abandon the doubt, it's like no longer in danger. So we need to get to know these, because when there is a disturbance and we don't know yet, we can just ask, like, well, is the mind wanting something? Is the mind wanting to get rid of something? Is there too little energy in the mind? Is there too much energy in the mind? Is the mind spinning with doubt? What's the problem? And you'll be surprised that this list of 5 covers a lot of the disturbances that we experience. And then once we sort of know, oh, there's some wanting going on, we can get close, and then we can do the work. Well, what's the Vedana here with the wanting mind? How is, the affective feeling of pleasantness, unpleasantness, or neutrality somehow contributing to this painful experience of wanting? And then we drop from the idea that I want this, we drop into, oh, it feels like this. Can I feel this? Can I feel like if the wanting is being generated by a mental image of having what we want, and that's pleasant, and the thought of I don't have what I want is unpleasant, right? We really look at those 2 Vedanas, the unpleasantness of not having what I want, or the pleasantness of imagining having what I want. Can I feel that Vedana without having to do anything about it? Like, imagine, being on a nice, warm, tropical beach, and not having to bundle up when I'm outside. I can imagine the pleasantness of that without getting intoxicated by the pleasantness of that image. And here, I'm on the West Coast. I'm on the East Coast, so it's past my lunchtime, and I haven't eaten. And I can imagine, and they serve really nice meals here at the Forest Refuge. And they're putting a meal aside for me, by the way. So I'll eat after I'm done. I can imagine, whatever it is, I don't know what they're making, but I can imagine some nice meal. I can feel the pleasantness of that imagining, but I don't have to get confused by it. It's just that pleasant feeling. But if I do get intoxicated with it, then I kind of lose where I am in the talk. Is it going to be lasagna? And all of a sudden, like the mind gets imprisoned or feels in debt, like I won't be free until I have what I'm imagining. And we end up suffering over and over again. So before I run out of time, I wanted to read a little bit from one of our great elders in our early Buddhist tradition, Theravada Buddhist tradition. And this is a woman from Thailand. She died in 1978. But unusual for the Buddhist tradition, this is a lay woman is sort of the wise person. And especially in Thailand, it's a pretty patriarchal culture. But she became quite famous, and a lot of students would gather around her. And you can read her teachings in a wonderful book I recommend. It's a little intense, but for those who are really into your practice. Her name is Upasika Ki Nanayan. And the book you could just Google, and I believe it's freely available online, An Unentangled Knowing, the Teachings of a Thai Buddhist Laywoman. And Thanissaro Bhikkhu translated it. An Unentangled Knowing. I meant to put it in the document, the link to it, but I forgot. So sorry about that. But there are other articles on the hindrances in that link, if you follow that link in the chat there. But this is a section that was in Tricycle magazine, an excerpt from that book. And she writes, or she probably didn't write it, it was probably just a transcription of some talk she gave. Even though we practice, we continue to fall for pleasant feelings. Feelings are illusory on many levels. We don't realize that they're changeable and unreliable. Instead of offering pleasure, they offer us nothing but stress. Yet we're still addicted to them. This business of feeling is a very subtle matter. Please try to contemplate it carefully, this latching onto feelings of pleasure, pain, and neutrality. And you have to experiment with pain more than you may want to. When there are feelings of physical pain or mental distress, the mind will struggle because it doesn't like pain. But when pain turns to pleasure, the mind likes it and is content with it. So it keeps on playing with feeling, even though, as we've already said, feeling is inconstant, stressful, and not really ours. But the mind doesn't see this. All it sees are feelings of pleasure, and it wants them. Try looking into how feeling gives rise to craving. It's because we want pleasant feelings that craving whispers right there to the feeling. If you observe carefully, you'll see that this is very important. This is where the paths and fruition leading to nibbana are attained, right? If we extinguish the craving in feeling, that's nibbana, that's freedom. So that's a real testimonial to get interested in that, how craving arises out of feeling, and how we can learn to be with the feelings, the inevitable feelings that come with the diversity of our experiences through the days. We can learn to be with feeling, the feeling tone, without it giving rise to craving, by a willingness to feel the feeling, to feel the pleasantness. So it's not about neglecting the pleasantness of eating lasagna, or the unpleasantness of being too cold, or experiencing loss, experiencing insecurity. We learn to really feel the unpleasantness of that. It's just the unpleasantness being known without getting intoxicated and caught and building, constructing dramas that burden our heart over and over again. It's like that old adage, if you feed a wild animal, it's going to keep showing up. Right? It doesn't ever leave us alone because it associates you with food. And it's the same thing if we, in a sense, feed the monster of craving, the craving monster, that habit of taking things personally and thinking that I need this, I need to get rid of that. Well, it just becomes the groove in the mind. It becomes the habit. And then we get addicted to the intensity of greed, hatred, and delusion. And we lose our way. We lose how healing peace is. The simplicity of a heart that's empty of craving, empty of greed, hatred, and delusion. This is what the Buddha means by nibbana. It's actually was at the time of the Buddha, nibbana or nirvana was a common word, evidently, meaning when a fire goes out, the extinguishing of a fire. So we're extinguishing, we're allowing the fires of craving to extinguish through not adding fuel. And the fuel we're not adding is this confusion, this taking personally the feeling tone. Taking it personally. And that's what builds that entangling drama that we've gotten so used to. So I'll leave it here today. And just a couple of announcements into the new year. There's a half-day retreat on January 11th in the morning. I'll be leading that 9 to 12:30 Minnesota time. And that following Monday the 13th, we begin our Monday night Buddhist studies class. This winter we'll be studying impermanence. And then that next weekend, the 16th, 17th, and 18th of January, Megan Brandolin and myself will be doing a weekend of teaching. Mostly Meg will be teaching Megan. She'll give a talk on Friday night. Both of us will do a workshop on befriending death on Saturday. And then Megan, who's a palliative care doctor, will be down at Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, will be doing a workshop on Sunday afternoon on some of the more practical aspects of preparing for death. Things that you can do to just ease the way with this inevitable part of life. So keep that in mind. There's information on the website, on the calendar for those 3 programs on the weekend of the 16th, 17th, and 18th, and it will be both on Zoom and in person at the City Center. So thanks again, everybody, for showing up. Feel free to stay for small groups. If you want to meet in groups of 3 or 4, I'll divide you. If you're not going to stay, I'll say goodbye. Hope to see you next Sunday. Lucy is doing the year-end retreat, so I'll divide folks into small groups.